President Trump says he's ready for phase 2 of his sanctions plan against Russia. But is there even a sanctions plan to speak of? Or is he just dropping sanctions based mostly on vibes? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So this has been what should be an optimistic story if it was a president who wasn't Donald Trump, because he's said that he is ready for phase 2 of Russia sanctions over the Ukraine conflict and over Putin's unwillingness to engage in meaningful peace talks. You might note that for all the president's efforts, Ukrainian President Zelensky has said he would happily meet with Vladimir Putin, literally like green eggs and ham. He'll meet him on a train. He'll meet him on a plane. He'll meet him on a plane. He'll meet him on a mountain. He'll meet him at a fountain. By contrast, Vladimir Putin has constantly made obviously preposterous excuses to not hold any kind of meaningful peace talks. Those excuses have ranged from, before I have peace talks, I need Ukrainian forces to withdraw from all their fortified positions in the east, to, Zelensky isn't even the real president of Ukraine. So it's fairly obvious to everybody, again, but President Trump, that Vladimir Putin is just stalling for time and playing games. And of course, President Trump happy to play along. And this so-called second phase of sanctioning Russia is right a part of it, because you might recall to yourselves, I don't recall President Trump rolling out a first phase of sanctioning Russia. And he says, listen, guys, look, I sanctioned India with 50% tariffs because they bought Russian oil. Now, you may note that these 50% tariffs are actually kind of inclusive to a bunch of other tariff plans, because essentially when the administration went to India and said, hey, why, let's do a trade deal, India said, why would we do a trade deal with you? You always renege on your trade deals anyway. It's a waste of time. And you can imagine Trump didn't like that. But India is a pretty nationalist country and a pretty proud country. So they're really not open to this kind of bullying. In fact, again, someone like Modi, who's kind of a strong man adjacent leader, obviously democratically elected, isn't definitely not going to be seen as kowtowing to Trump the way European leaders seem willing to do. And Trump has said, Trump has literally said, he's like, listen, it cost hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia for him to hit India with secondary sanctions. He says, you call that no action? I haven't even done phase 2 or 3 yet. Now, here's what I want to point out. First off, this is the stock price of the Russian oil company over the last 12 months. And let's see if we can zoom in over the last month here. All right. Okay. It's going to be mad at me. That's fine. So as you can see, here's the stock price in August 30th, right? Here's August 22nd, right after the meeting between Trump and Putin went nowhere. Then here he is 2 weeks later, and you can see that basically to Gazprom, the Russian oil giant, there's no meaningful impact, right? So whatever these sanctions are doing, Gazprom, literally Russian oil company, having their stock price absolutely not being touched by this sanction. And the reason is pretty clear, because look, India will continue buying Russian oil, right? That was 3 days ago. So essentially, it hasn't cost Russia anything because India has said, we just don't care. And well, that's not great, but exactly what we predicted would happen on this channel, because you can only renege and back away from negotiations so often before everyone just says there's no reason to negotiate with you at all. You may note that we did this to Canada, where Trump demanded a whole bunch of a renegotiation of whatever it was, the USMCA. Canada said, okay, they renegotiated it, and then Trump tariffed them again. He did the same thing to Mexico. He's done the same thing to China. No less than 3 different times he's announced that he's totally got a trade deal with China, only to walk away from it. You might also recall the U.S. has done a minerals deal with Ukraine that was supposed to allow Ukraine to purchase U.S. weapons, but in fact, the U.S. has actually stopped providing Ukraine with weapons of any kind, not even allowing them to purchase it. Instead, they forced the Europeans to make those purchases and then donate them to Ukraine. So all of these things collectively, right, produces an international community that says, listen, I'm gonna make a deal with someone whom I can, trust to follow through on their deals. And for India, that's been clear. It's countries like China and Russia who have, if nothing else, consistent leadership, right? Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, these are people who are credible because they are literally the same ruler for multiple decades, but also because when they make a deal, they tend to honor it on a long enough timeline, even if they are authoritarians. And this is kind of the problem, is that, again, Trump just loses credibility because you remember on August 22nd, Trump said, in 2 weeks, you'll know which way I'm going because I'm going to go one way or the other and they'll learn the hard way. This is in reference to the Vladimir Putin unwillingness, right? Trump said Putin needs to move concretely towards a peace deal in order, or else there'll be totally consequences. And here we are again, we're at the 2-week mark. Where are the consequences? As discussed, India is still buying Russian oil, so his little secondary tariffs did fuck all. Gazprom trading right where it was. So where's the peace through strength? Where's the coercion? Where's the forcing Putin to the table? None of it's happening, right? The 2 weeks meant nothing. And Trump will just say, well, give him 2 more weeks, because that's the only thing he seems capable of doing. But as we've seen, he is unable to even recall what he's done from week to week. So it's really sort of silly to even put any credibility in what he says. Now, Scott Besson is, of course, rolling out the cope, saying that, guys, totally Russia's going to be on the brink of collapse and Putin's totally going to go to the negotiating table. But China is the major buyer of Russian energy exports. But more importantly, China is also one of the largest country providing Russia and the Russian public with consumer goods, industrial goods, military goods. None of those, and China has faced no sanctions, no tariffs, no consequences for it, because essentially the U.S. knows that if they were to hammer China, China would hammer them back, driving up inflation, which is something that would be kind of a disaster for Trump's economy, and the market will reflect that. So essentially, I don't know what else to tell you. This is cowardice, right? It's cowardice and it's a failure of strategy. We've talked about this on this channel a lot, that the White House's current policy isn't a strategy. It's governing based on vibes. And as we just laid out, that you can't just simply say, well, this is the peace deal, the Russia peace negotiations, and over here is the China negotiations, because we just described they're totally bound up with each other. You can't sit there and go, okay, we have to punish China for its massive support to the Russian war machine, and at the same time try to negotiate a favorable trade deal with China. For most U.S. policymakers, it's fairly simple. China is obviously and explicitly an enemy of the United States. They are supporting America's adversaries against America's allies, right? Not just in Ukraine, but in all of Western Europe. And so the administration simply being unable, completely impotent to say the magic words, which is China is an enemy of the United States and probably needs to be confronted or punished, or at least not actively enabled by the United States, is just a bridge too far, because it requires, to do that is sophisticated. It's challenging. It requires making trade-offs. It requires even some short-term pain. But these are all things the administration, or at least Trump himself, who, again, governs based on vibes instead of really thoughtful, deliberate policy, just lacks the ability to do.